I was sitting in a crowded department meeting last Tuesday when Mark decided to take his shot. You know the type of someone who treats every professional interaction like a high-stakes poker game where the only way to win is to make someone else blink. He dropped a comment that was a masterpiece of passive aggression, something about how certain team members seem more interested in their personal boundaries than the company's bottom line. And he looked directly at me, leaning back with this smug, expectant tilt of his head. He wasn't just making a point, he was offering a transaction. He was handing me a match and just waiting for me to provide the gasoline. The room went thick with that awkward, prickly silence where everyone starts looking at their laptops. I could feel the heat rising in my neck. The currency of the moment was clear. I was supposed to defend myself, to explain my value, or, to snap back with a clever retort. Mark was practically vibrating with anticipation, ready to feed off whatever defensive energy I threw back at him. He wanted the drama. He needed the spectacle to validate his own posture. But then I did something that seemed to catch him completely off guard. I did absolutely nothing. I didn't huff. I didn't roll my eyes. I didn't even tighten my jaw. I just took a slow sip of my water, looked at my notes for a second, and then turned to the project manager and asked a dry question about the Q3 timeline. The shift in the room was almost physical. Because I refused to enter the transaction, Mark was left holding his own insult, and without my reaction to give it momentum, it just sat there. He started fidgeting with his pen. He cleared his throat. He looked around for an ally, but everyone else was now focused on the timeline I'd just mentioned. By the time the meeting ended, he looked exhausted, while I felt strangely energized. That moment made me realize that we often mistake silence for a lack of power. We've been conditioned to believe that the person who gets the last word wins, but watching Mark deflate taught me the opposite. In an age where your attention is a product and your reaction is a currency, choosing to withhold it isn't avoidance, it's an act of extreme clarity. It's a refusal to let someone else's chaos become your internal weather.
That story is, it's the perfect frame for this whole conversation. It really gets to the core of this paradox in modern communication.
Paradox being what exactly?
Well, we're all sort of culturally wired to believe that action equals power, right?
Yeah.
That being responsive means you're competent, and that if you're silent, you're weak or you have nothing to say.
Yeah, you lost the argument.
Exactly. But your experience shows the opposite. The strategic power of not reacting is just immense. The energy that Mark was trying to get from you, that's a finite resource. And when you just conserved it, you starved the interaction itself. He had nothing to feed on.
That's it. That's the core question we want to get into today. Why is that immediate reaction, that impulse to defend yourself or explain or hit back, why is that actually the highest price you can pay? If you really think about attention and reaction as a kind of currency, then most of us in these stressful situations, we're just impulse spending.
That's a great way to put it. We're looking at strategic non-reaction as a deliberate, conscious refusal to enter a transaction that at the end of the day is going to cost you way more internal resources than you could ever possibly gain from it externally.
Right.
It's the difference between, being a player in the conflict versus being the one who shuts the whole game down. If you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, our brains evolved for really fast, immediate physical threats.
A predator in the grass.
A predator in the grass, a challenge from a rival. The cost of delaying your reaction in that ancestral world was, it was death. But today, in the kind of chronic digital professional world we live in, those same immediate reactions are what get exploited.
They become the fuel.
They become the fuel for all these cycles of drama and distraction.
Right.
If you react defensively to Mark, you don't just validate his aggression, you give him the spectacle he wants, and you spend your own precious cognitive and, frankly, metabolic resources to do it.
So this deep dive today is really meant to give you a kind of blueprint for this strategic withdrawal. We've pulled together insights from evolutionary psychology, from high-stakes communication studies, even from the complex math of game theory, to show how choosing silence or delay is a profoundly strategic act.
Yeah, we're going to look at 3 different areas where this power really shows up. First, we'll unpack how withholding your reaction acts as a high-status signal, how it makes you seem composed and confident in competitive social situations.
Okay.
Second, we'll look at it through the lens of game theory and see how not reacting can be a really precise tool to break these destructive conflict spirals.
And then the big one.
We'll explore why strategic non-reaction is, it's become absolutely essential for our psychological survival in the digital age, where everything social media, AI, is basically engineered to exploit our deepest evolutionary wiring for instant feedback.
Okay, let's start with that first idea then. The idea that silence or not reacting can signal high status. This feels a little counterintuitive, but in a competitive setting, you're right. The person who says nothing often seems the most secure.
They really do.
I was reading this account of an interaction with a senior executive. Let's call him Marcus. He's in the world of high-stakes international finance. And the scene is this super competitive boardroom in Singapore. His company is trying to lock down a major investment.
And this is a classic high-stakes scenario. It's designed to stress test the leadership. So you have Marcus on one side, and on the other, you have a group of very aggressive venture capitalists.
The sharks.
The sharks. And you have to understand, VCs are often trained to use techniques that are designed to uncover vulnerability, not just in the business plan, but in the person leading the company. So they're firing off these intense, really personal criticisms, trying to bait Marcus into some kind of defensive, emotional reaction.
They're not actually looking for information.
Not really. They're looking for a crack in his composure. They want to see how he handles pressure.
So the low status response, or at least the instinctive one, is exactly what we were talking about before.
Yeah.
You scramble, you justify the numbers, you defend your team, maybe you even lash out with your own criticism.
And the second you do that, you've shown your hand, you've shown a lack of emotional self-regulation, you've shown a vulnerability they can now exploit. It's basically proof that their words hit their mark and they hurt you.
But Marcus does the exact opposite. When they level the most inflammatory accusation at him, he doesn't interrupt. He doesn't even shift in his chair. He just sits perfectly still, holds this soft eye contact with the person speaking, and says absolutely nothing for what was apparently almost 2 full minutes.
2 minutes. I mean, think about how long that is in a tense boardroom meeting. It's an eternity.
It's agonizing.
Everyone is expecting this immediate, energetic defense. And instead, there's just silence. The tension just builds and builds.
And the account noted that the VCs, the ones who started the aggression, they were the first ones to break. They started fidgeting, looking down at their papers, and eventually one of them actually felt the need to fill that void by qualifying his own criticism. He basically walked back some of the sting.
It's a perfect demonstration of non-reaction working as what's called a costly signal within a social hierarchy. This is where the evolutionary psychology comes in.
A costly signal, what does that mean exactly?
So the theory of costly signaling basically says that certain behaviors are reliable indicators of an underlying quality-like fitness or competence only because they are expensive or difficult to fake. For Marcus, sitting in that awkward silence under that intense pressure, it requires incredible internal control.
And it's risky.
It's very risky, and
Yeah,
that's
right.
the costly part. It risks being misunderstood, so it's a high-cost behavior.
But what is the actual cost? Is it just feeling uncomfortable?
It's more than that. The cost is on multiple levels. There's the psychological cost of having to suppress your own fight or flight response, which is huge. But the biggest cost is reputational. If Marcus were actually an incompetent leader, his silence could have been seen as him being stunned or confused or even arrogant. The deal could have collapsed.
So the fact that he was willing to take that risk.
The fact that he was confident enough to risk that interpretation, to incur the cost of that silence, that's what credibly signals this terrifying level of self-assurance and dignity that, frankly, no amount of defensive words could ever communicate.
Okay, I think I get the mechanism.
Sure.
But let me just play devil's advocate for a second.
Yeah.
What if the silence is mistaken for incompetence? Or even just passive aggression? How do you tell the difference between a powerful stillness and just someone who's afraid or has nothing to say? Silence is ambiguous, right?
That is a crucial distinction. And the difference really comes down to the context and, most importantly, the nonverbal indicators. In Marcus's case, the source material specifically notes he maintained solid eye contact. His posture was composed, he was upright, but he wasn't rigid. Now, if you have nothing to say because you're nervous or incompetent, that's usually signaled by rigidity, by fidgeting, by looking away, or kind of physically collapsing in on yourself.
So if he had hunched over or started looking at the ceiling, the VCs would have read that silence as fear.
Submissive fear, exactly. It would have confirmed their negative assessment. But because he presented this calm composure, he redirected all the ambiguity back onto their behavior. He made them uncomfortable with their own aggression.
He signaled that his status was so secure that their criticism, which was just external noise, literally could not touch him.
That's the essence of it. He didn't need to defend his dignity because his position was solid enough to withstand an attack. That is the core of high status in these competitive environments. You are the person who does not need external validation or defense.
This connects directly to all that nonverbal research, doesn't it? We're always sending these relational messages with our bodies, even when we're not speaking. How does that research break down the difference between dominance and nervousness?
The research here is really fascinating. Dominance is associated with what researchers call dynamic and varied behaviors. So think about someone who's projecting high status. They usually have more expansive postures, they take up more space, their voice is louder, deeper, they tend to smile less because smiling can be a submission signal.
And they talk more.
They talk more, and crucially, they initiate more turns at talk, and they're more likely to interrupt others. These behaviors are dynamic. They're actively shaping the interaction and showing a command of the environment.
Okay, so what about nervousness, the other end of the spectrum?
Nervousness is signaled through rigid and muted behaviors. So this would be rigidity in facial movements, like a frozen, unnatural look, fewer and shorter term speaking, a softer voice. The key finding is that where dominance is linked to high variability in movement and speech, nervousness is linked to low variability. The nervous person is psychologically and often physically rigid. They're trying to minimize the risk of being seen or heard making a mistake.
So Marx's stillness wasn't nervous rigidity, it was strategic composure.
Precisely. It was the opposite. Composure is a signal of relaxation under pressure. It's used strategically to instill trust and confidence. We know from research that when leaders show high composure, it's linked to higher employee satisfaction and commitment. Marcus signaled maximal composure. He demonstrated that their verbal assault had zero effect on his internal state. He was a stable, confident partner who couldn't be rattled. He essentially made his mind and his reaction a costly resource that they had not earned the right to spend. That silence wasn't empty. It was a profound act of self-possession.
We've seen how silence works as a status signal in that kind of a closed, high-stakes negotiation. But now I think we need to shift to a more dynamic environment, like an ongoing conflict.
Right.
Because here, not reacting, it seems to shift from just being a status signal to being a strategic tool from game theory, designed to break these really entrenched, destructive cycles of behavior.
Exactly. And to understand the solution, you first have to define the problem, which is what you're talking about, the conflict death spiral.
We see this everywhere, not just in, geopolitics, but in workplace rivalries, messy divorces. It's this predictable outcome of negative reciprocity. Party A does something negative.
A defection in game theory terms.
A defection. And Party B reciprocates with their own negative action, and often they escalate it in the next round. It's the classic eye for an eye dynamic.
And what makes it a spiral, and not just a tit-for-tat exchange, is that high probability of escalation. Research actually shows that responding to a negative action with an even more negative action, a two eyes for an eye response, is almost as probable as just matching the negativity. So once that spiral starts, the mutual anger just feeds itself, even when both people know it's destructive and draining all their resources.
I can think of a million times I've been caught in that spiral, just in an email chain, where the tone just gets more and more aggressive with every reply. You waste a whole afternoon burning what you call metabolic resources.
That is the tit-for-tat trap in action. Tit-for-tat is this incredibly successful, simple strategy in game theory. You cooperate on the first move, and then you just copy whatever your opponent did last. It's effective because it's nice, but it's also retaliatory and forgiving. The problem is, in the real world, where there's noise and miscommunication, a simple tit-for-tat strategy can easily lock you into a death spiral. A single, accidental negative move by one person can trigger this endless chain of retaliation.
To make this more concrete, we could look at that neighborhood case study, the feud between those two families in Chicago. We'll call one of the men Elias. They were locked in this generational conflict that had devolved into just mind-numbingly petty sabotage.
It sounds absurdly childish when you list it out, but they were slashing tires, reporting each other for code violations, noise complaints, spray painting property.
It's childish, but the cost to them was real. They were burning huge amounts of their metabolic resources, their time dealing with police and lawyers, their money on repairs and fines, and their emotional health, just dwelling on all this spite.
And the antagonist's motivation wasn't even to gain anything tangible. It was purely to provoke a reaction, because your reaction validates their own expensive energy. By staying engaged, Elias and his neighbor were locked in this perfect, maladaptive reciprocity cycle. They were playing the game, but the game was designed to exhaust them both.
So the mediator who came in didn't try to solve the underlying problem. They just tried to change the strategy. Elias was convinced to adopt a strategy of strategic non-reaction after the very next incident, which happened to be his garbage bin getting knocked over and the trash spread all over his driveway.
And this is where we can introduce the strategic upgrade to tit-for-tat. It's called generous tit-for-tat, or GTFT. The core rules of GTFT are specifically designed to maximize long-term cooperation while avoiding that death spiral we talked about. Elias's choice to just clean up the bin without saying a word or retaliating, that was the crucial act of generosity and non-reaction.
Let's break down the rules of GTFT, because the nuance here is what makes it so powerful. This isn't about being a doormat. It's a cold, calculated strategy.
It's completely calculated. The 4 rules are a blueprint for how to maintain a long-term interaction with someone who might be hostile or just unreliable.
Okay, rule 1. Start with cooperation. You always begin an interaction by cooperating. This establishes goodwill. The signal is, my initial intention is not hostile.
Right. Rule 2, reciprocate cooperation. If the other person cooperated on their last move, you copy that cooperative move. This is how you build and maintain trust. You reward positive behavior quickly and reliably.
Now here's the key part, the generous part. Rule 3, forgive one-time defections. If your opponent defects, if they do something negative once, you forgive it. You continue to cooperate on the next round.
And this is the genius of GTFT. This is the mechanism that prevents the death spiral. It accounts for accidental missteps, minor provocations, or just, external noise like the wind knocking over a trash can or a typo in an email that sounds aggressive. If Elias had immediately retaliated, the spiral would have just continued. By choosing non-reaction, he absorbed the cost of that one defection without mirroring the negativity.
And finally, rule 4 is that you punish repeated defections. You only retaliate if the opponent defects over and over again, showing that it's an intentional, malicious pattern. But even then, the strategy requires you to return to cooperation as soon as they do.
The strategic value of what Elias did, his non-reaction, was that it disrupted the negative feedback loop. His neighbor expected anger, right? Retaliation, or at the very least a visible sign that he was annoyed. When Elias denied him that feedback, he essentially starved the whole reciprocal energy exchange. He saved his own psychological and metabolic resources and forced his neighbor to reevaluate the cost of his aggression because it wasn't getting any return.
So strategic non-reaction in this context isn't passive avoidance. It's a strategic withdrawal of resources. It's recognizing that staying in the fight costs you way more currency than just cleaning up the mess and moving on.
Exactly. And we see this in organizations too. Studies on reducing workplace deviance show the most effective strategies are the ones that insert a one-sided breakpoint. They focus on stopping the reciprocating behaviors, not just punishing the person who started it. It's a profound act of discipline, choosing to spend your finite energy on your own goals, like your job or your garden, rather than fueling a spite match.
Okay, so the principles of preserving your resources and strategic withdrawal, they become exponentially more important when we leave these, face-to-face conflicts and enter the digital world.
They really do, because here the challenge isn't just one other person, it's the fundamental structure of the environment itself, which is designed to extract your reaction as its core commodity.
We're moving into the idea of evolutionary mismatch. Our psychological hardware, the way our brains are wired, it evolved over hundreds of thousands of years in small nomadic tribes. The environment changed very slowly.
Right. And now the environment is changing at light speed and our psychology just can't keep up. So what you get is our ancient adaptive responses triggering in these completely maladaptive ways, leading to just chronic stress and exhaustion.
The digital world provides these evolutionarily novel stimuli that our brain tries to process using its ancient pathways. Take the story of Amara, the young graphic designer who got caught in a social media call-out mob. She posted a design and was hit with this instantaneous, massive wave of negative feedback, thousands of notifications, dislikes, angry comments.
Amara's brain wasn't processing that as digital feedback. Her nervous system was processing that massive rejection as if she had just been condemned and socially excluded by her entire ancestral tribe.
Which back then would have been a death sentence.
A literal death sentence. Being ostracized meant no access to resources, no protection. So that immediate visceral panic she felt, the cortisol spike, the racing heart, that was her nervous system working exactly as it was designed to. But it was being applied to a context it was never built for.
That's the core mismatch. Our nervous system is wired for these face-to-face, high-stakes feedback loops. An argument with the village elder, a fight with a rival. But now it's being subjected to this chronic, instantaneous global-scale conflict. Amara realized that 5,000 digital dislikes are not the same thing as 5,000 people standing in her living room condemning her.
And that realization is the key. Her choice after that to delete the app and go spend the afternoon doing something messy and physical like pottery, that wasn't just her coping, it was a sophisticated act of biological rebellion against this whole digital economy.
She chose silence.
She chose silence. She conserved her attention and her metabolic resources from a system that actively treats outrage and defense and drama as its most profitable product. The stress so many of us carry today is largely the result of our ancient social mechanisms just being overwhelmed and exploited by these novel stimuli.
This leads us to another really critical concept for the modern world, which is mental proof. For all of human history, cooperation and trust have relied on these mental proofs. But generative AI is now fundamentally eroding the cost structure that makes them valid.
It really is.
So what exactly is a mental proof?
A mental proof is an observable action that we use to certify an unobservable fact about someone's mind. For instance, I can't look inside your brain to see if you're truly dedicated to a project or interested in a topic or if you're smart. But I can observe actions that certify those internal states. Spending 10 years learning a skill certifies dedication. Using complex technical jargon correctly certifies knowledge. Spending hours writing a personalized message certifies interest. All of these proofs work because they rely on the assumption that our mental resources, our time, our attention, our cognitive effort are scarce and costly to spend. They allow us to build trust, especially in low-trust environments.
And the disruption is that generative AI drives the cost of that mental activity to basically zero.
Precisely. If I can use an LLM to produce a complex piece of text or perfect code or a highly customized image in just a few seconds, then that output no longer credibly certifies the effort, time, or cognitive investment of a human mind. The content is cheap, and therefore, the mental proof is invalidated.
Let's walk through some examples of this because it has huge implications. Starting with something really fundamental, like a sincere apology.
A successful apology is a classic, costly signal. It has to certify two things to the person who was hurt. First, that the transgressor invested the cognitive effort to truly understand the victim's needs and their pain. That's proof of knowledge. And second, it has to signal that they value the relationship enough to ensure it won't happen again. That's the costly signal of commitment.
I can see immediately how AI fails here. If I get an apology that's, perfectly worded, but I have a suspicion it was written by ChatGPT, the whole thing is defeated.
It fails the costly signaling test. Research already shows that people rate an apology as significantly less sincere and are far less likely to forgive if they know it was written with heavy AI assistance.
Why is that?
Because it reduces the perceived cognitive investment. The listener thinks, you couldn't even be bothered to spend the basic mental effort to sit down and think through your own difficult thoughts about my pain. You delegated the sincerity. It fails to prove that you valued the relationship enough to invest your own scarce mental resources.
That makes perfect sense. What about in a professional context, like sending a cold email for a job or a sales pitch?
That used to be a mental proof of specific interest. A really thoughtful, well-crafted cold email signaled that the sender took their time and cognitive effort, a scarce resource, to research you and your company. That mental effort certified genuine interest.
And now?
And now an LLM can cheaply generate and send out thousands of similar, highly personalized sounding messages. So that output no longer certifies anything about the agent's specific interest or their expertise. The text is just a simulation and the proof is gone. We're all becoming immediately skeptical of any non-essential outreach.
This also seems like it would undermine how we signal that we belong to a community or subculture. I'm thinking of groups that have their own specialized jargon and inside references.
Absolutely. Think about any esoteric group finance, academic philosophy, a specific gaming community. In the past, being able to fluently use that specialized language and make those obscure references, that certified your devotion. It was a costly signal that you had invested deep time in that community's history and its artifacts.
It proved you were a real fan.
Prove you were one of them. Now, an AI can imitate that communication style instantly. It can produce text that's rich with all the right jargon. The person on the receiving end can no longer be sure if the person actually has the background knowledge or if they're just using an AI to fake the style. It devalues the very currency of belonging.
So in all these cases, the digital environment, which is optimized for cheap, frictionless output, is fundamentally compromising these human signals. Strategic non-reaction, choosing that thoughtful human pause, or just refusing to engage in the race to produce cheap content, it's a way of protecting the value of your own genuine human effort.
And the digital environment doesn't just erode mental proof. It systematically hijacks the fundamental motivational systems that govern all of our behavior. These systems evolved to solve 5 recurring adaptive problems, like staying safe, acquiring status, finding mates, and maintaining social bonds. The novelty of AI and social media provides these cues that just overload or distort these ancient mechanisms.
Okay, let's spend some time on these 5 mismatches because this feels really important. Let's start with the most visceral one, the self-protection mismatch. How does our ancient need to stay safe react to something as abstract as an algorithm?
Well, it comes down to anthropomorphism. Humans have what's called a hyperactive agency detection device. This was incredibly adaptive in our ancestral environment. If you hear a rustle in the grass, it's much safer to assume it's a predator that can think and plan and agent and run, rather than wait to confirm it's just the wind.
Better safe than sorry.
Better safe than sorry. We are wired to attribute human-like characteristics and intentions to things that aren't human. So as AI systems get more advanced, especially ones that can mimic human speech and decision-making, our ancient brain interprets them as an agent, and often as an outgroup person.
And because this agent is new and very competent, it feels like a potential threat.
It signals a potential threat, which automatically activates our self-protective motivations. This results in distrust, suspicion, unease, and anxiety toward AI.
So that feeling of AI dread that some people have, it isn't necessarily a logical assessment of a real threat, but it's an ancient adaptive defense mechanism firing off.
It absolutely is. Studies show that people feel acutely threatened by machines with human-like agentic abilities. Even when an AI decision maker can demonstrably outperform a human, say, in medical diagnostics or financial trading, people still trust the AI less than they trust a human peer. They report lower confidence, high skepticism. The novelty of this competent, non-human agent is setting off the deepest self-protective alarms in our system.
Okay, next up is the social status mismatch. Status is so fundamentally tied to our resources and our social standing, and AI seems to be interfering directly with our primary modern source of status, which is our job.
It interferes in 2 critical ways that create profound status anxiety. The first is just direct replacement. AI can mimic and in some cases outperform human cognition in specific areas. This leads to job loss anxiety. When you see AI as something capable of replacing you in a role that gives you income and social position, customer service, graphic design, content creation, it triggers massive status and resource competition concerns.
So we're not just competing with other people for a promotion anymore. We're competing with this frictionless, constantly improving technology for our basic relevance.
And the second challenge is what's called the democratization of expertise, which leads to skill creep. AI tools like ChatGPT or specialized code generators, they dramatically lower the barrier to entry in a lot of professional fields. Skills that used to be competitive suddenly become common, almost obsolete. This widespread access just heightens the competition for the few specialized roles that are left. So people feel this pressure to constantly learn new niche skills just to maintain their current status. It creates this chronic, anxiety-fueled state of required acceleration.
That sounds completely exhausting. It's like we're running faster and faster just to stay in the same place.
It is a massive drain on mental and metabolic energy. And when status anxiety is that high, people tend to spend a disproportionate amount of time trying to accumulate new professional resources, often at the expense of other crucial life goals, like forming deep social bonds or starting a family, especially when those goals seem impossibly far away because of the economic instability that this technological change brings.
Let's move on to the mate acquisition and retention mismatch. How does AI in the digital world distort our evolved mechanisms for finding and keeping a partner?
Our evolved mating psychology is incredibly attuned to cues of desirability and availability. And social media and AI basically hijack this by creating an illusion of abundance. They generate these highly attractive, realistic images, profiles, and even deepfakes of people who either don't exist or are so heavily optimized they might as well not.
The paradox of choice.
It is the paradox of choice on steroids. Ancestrally, you might have encountered a few dozen potential mates in your entire lifetime. Online, in a matter of minutes, you can be exposed to hundreds or thousands. Our minds are just not equipped to filter this volume, which leads to that paradox. People report increased difficulties in commitment and forming healthy, long-term relationships because their brain is constantly being told that the perfect one is just one more swipe away. It fundamentally undermines your commitment to your current relationship.
And deepfakes are being used maliciously here too, right?
Oh, yes. Deepfakes, these hyper-realistic fabricated images or videos, are now a key tool in sophisticated romance fraud. Scammers use real-time deep-fake video calls to mimic facial expressions and build intense intimacy very quickly as a social engineering tactic. They bypass our normal deception detection mechanisms because that mate acquisition drive is so strongly activated. Victims have been known to continue sending money even after they've been shown evidence that the profile is fake because the psychological need for connection just overrides their logic.
That just speaks to the raw power of that hijacked evolutionary drive. How does AI affect mate retention keeping the partner you already have?
Well, the perceived abundance of desirable alternatives online inherently lowers your satisfaction with your existing relationship. Being exposed to all these highly attractive potential mates has been shown to cause both men and women to evaluate their current partners less favorably. And more recently, we've seen the rise of AI chatbots like Replica, which are designed to simulate human-like relationships.
The rise of AI as a romantic competitor.
Precisely. These platforms provide simulated emotional intimacy. And even though users know they're interacting with a product, the simulation is often powerful enough to trigger genuine relational feelings. There have been studies showing real-life partners experiencing jealousy when their significant others spent time and money on these highly engaging chatbots. Your system responds as if there's a real relationship threat, a rival which undermines commitment and creates real relationship dissatisfaction based on a non-human entity.
That is truly mind-bending. The fact that we have to strategically conserve our emotional energy from competing with robots. Okay, let's look at the final mismatch. Affiliation and social monitoring mismatch. This seems to get right at the sheer overload of social data we all face.
Our ancestors lived in small groups where social information was low quantity but high quality. Our psychological mechanisms, the social monitoring system, and the sociometer evolved to constantly monitor cues and gauge our inclusionary status within that small, high-stakes group. The sociometer is often described as our internal gauge of self-esteem. It assesses how much other people value interacting with us. When it dips, we're powerfully motivated to perform behaviors to restore that relationship.
The problem is the sociometer evolved to monitor maybe 150 people, Dunbar's number, our whole tribal circle.
And today, the average social media user is monitoring hundreds, if not thousands, of friends and weak ties. Social media satisfies our need to belong, but at the same time, it exploits our wiring by forcing our monitoring system to process this exponentially huge volume of social data, much of it from weak and latent ties, people who have very little personal relevance to our actual survival.
So we're devoting huge amounts of attentional resources to monitoring information that doesn't actually contribute to our core well-being or our real inclusionary status.
And this overload is what creates fear of missing out. FOMO. FOMO is a cognitive bias related to social resources. It compels us to use these platforms excessively to constantly monitor our inclusionary status. Neurological evidence even links FOMO activity to the brain regions associated with processing social inclusion signals, which confirms that our ancient need to belong is being hijacked and overstimulated by this chronic, novel digital input.
And finally, let's touch on anonymity. Anonymity is an evolutionarily novel state that just completely breaks our system of social control and conflict regulation.
In ancestral groups, everything was face-to-face. Your identity was known, and if you did something wrong, there were immediate consequences, like moral condemnation or being ostracized. These punishment strategies regulated aggression. The entire system relied on being able to identify who did what. Anonymity completely decouples the transgression from the aggressor's identity. It removes all accountability.
So online, an aggressor expects no reputational damage and no immediate risk of physical or social harm. The whole cost-benefit analysis for being aggressive just flips.
Exactly. Anonymity tilts that cost-benefit analysis asymmetrically, which promotes antisocial and aggressive behaviors like cyberbullying. Anonymous forums have been found to have double the rate of incivility compared to non-anonymous ones. The strategic power of non-reaction in this kind of toxic environment is simply recognizing that engaging with an anonymous aggressor is a transaction with zero upside for you and a 100% resource drain. It is the ultimate exercise in conserving your energy from a low-stakes, high-cost interaction. So as we bring all the threads of this deep dive together, the message is remarkably consistent. Whether you're looking at evolutionary psychology, game theory, or modern digital life, non-reaction is never passive. It's an active, highly strategic refusal to spend your finite internal resources, your metabolic, cognitive, and emotional energy on conflicts or systems that thrive purely on getting you to exchange energy with them.
We've seen that in competitive settings like a boardroom. That silence, that calculated 2-minute pause, is a costly signal. Just like the executive Marcus, the ability to withhold a reaction signals this robust emotional self-regulation and profound composure. And in those high-status hierarchies, composure is read as superior power because you're signaling that your position is so secure it just doesn't require a defense.
And in cycles of negative conflict like that neighborhood feud, the strategic non-reaction that comes from generous tit-for-tat is the necessary intervention to stop that maladaptive spiral. It is resource conservation in action. It allows you to preserve your energy by denying the aggressor the feedback loop they need to keep the fight going, which makes the conflict expensive only for the person who started it.
And most critically, the digital age has made strategic non-reaction a necessary defense mechanism for our own mental survival. AI is fundamentally disrupting the systems of mental proof, the observable human effort that once certified sincerity or expertise or devotion. As automated output drives the cost of mental effort to zero, that tactical pause or silence becomes a way to maintain the value of genuine human investment, refusing to enter a race to the bottom of cheaply produced, low-sincerity content.
The constant psychological stress so many of us experience is a direct result of our ancient, finely tuned social mechanisms being overwhelmed and exploited by this evolutionary mismatch. AI and social media are overwhelming our sociometer, our status needs, our safety mechanisms with exponential and often distorted stimuli. To navigate this world, you have to develop intentional, deliberate strategies, recognizing that your attention and your reactions are extremely valuable, finite commodities. The power, at the end of the day, lies in what you choose not to give away.